Let's look at preparing for a Windows installation by configuring a RAID array using the RAID controller built onto a motherboard. Let's start by starting up the computer. And as the BIOS loads, I'll hit delete to enter the setup configuration. Notice that currently I have 4 serial ATA hard drives configured in this computer, along with one IDE drive, which is the CD-ROM and the DVD drive. Currently, the computer is configured to use the serial ATA drives in the serial ATA mode. So if I were to exit the BIOS and continue on with the boot process, after the BIOS continues to load, it will look for the operating system files on one of those hard drives. And currently there is no operating system loaded, so it does not find anything. The first task in configuring a RAID array using the motherboard RAID controller is to change the serial ATA mode. Let's restart the computer and enter the BIOS setup program. Now if I go down to storage configuration, I need to modify the on-chip serial ATA type. Notice currently that it's selected IDE. So the serial ATA devices resemble IDE hard drives on my computer. In order to configure a RAID array, I need to choose the RAID option. Okay, with that, let me back out of here. Let me go and exit and save my changes. And then I'll restart. Now when the computer boots, after the BIOS loads, it will load the drivers for the RAID configuration utility. So now that I've changed the serial ATA type to RAID, my computer loads the configuration utility for the RAID controller on the motherboard. And notice here it says to press Ctrl F to enter the configuration utility. Let me do that. And now I have the menu where I can choose to configure my drives into RAID arrays. So for instance, let me choose one and view the current drive assignments. Notice here I have 4 hard drives installed in my system, each of them 80 gigabytes in size, and they are currently all assigned in the assignment column here as single disks, which means they do not exist in any type of a RAID array. Down at the bottom I have instructions for how to work with this screen, so to exit or to back up, I just press Escape. Let me create a RAID array by selecting option number 2, Define LD. And LD stands for logical disk. I have 4 physical disks, but I will define a RAID array which will become a logical disk. So I press 2, and next I choose a logical disk number. Let's start with 1. I'll press Enter, and then I can define the disks and the array characteristics. So currently, logical disk number 1 will be configured as RAID 0, which is striping. To change the RAID mode, if I look down on the bottom, it says space in order to change the mode. So I can press the space bar to change the RAID mode 1, 5, or 10, or just a bunch of drives. RAID Ready prepares the disk to become part of an array, but doesn't actually create the array. Let's choose a RAID 1 array. And then I use the arrow keys to jump down to the other settings. I'll accept all these default settings up here, and then I'll come down to the drive assignments. I currently have 4 drives that are available for assignment to a RAID array. With this column selected, I can simply press Y to change the assignment. So currently the first drive will now be assigned to the logical disk 1, which will be part of a RAID 1 array. Let's try to stop right here. Let's say Ctrl Y to save. And then I'm told that I need a minimum of 2 disks to use this mode. That means a RAID 1 array must have a minimum of 2 disks, and I've only assigned 1. So I'll press Escape, and then I'll come down here and I'll add a second disk to that array. And then Ctrl Y to save. And now it says that in order to create the logical disk, the master boot record of the drives will be erased. So if I have any data on these drives, creating the new logical disk will erase all of the data on those drives. So if I'm sure I want to do that, I'll press Ctrl Y to continue. And then I can change the array capacity or press any key to just use the maximum capacity. Okay, So I've defined a logical disk, which is RAID 1, or mirroring. It has a total of 2 hard disks and a capacity of 80 gigabytes. Now remember that each disk on its own is 80 gigabytes in size. When I do mirroring, however, I place 2 copies of the data on my disks, 1 copy going to each disk. So I have 80 gigabytes on one disk, 80 gigabytes on the second disk, but between the 2 disks I can only save a total of 80 gigabytes worth of files. This is referred to as overhead when I configure the RAID array. I lose 80 gigabytes of space, but I have gained redundancy. Let me hit escape to back up, and now I could go back and view the drive assignments, and I'll see that the first disk is part of logical disk 1, and it is the first physical disk, and the second disk is part of logical disk 1, and it is the second disk in that array. Let me just go back, and let's delete the logical disk. So I'll choose option 3, and then with my logical disk selected, I can hit the delete key to delete this logical disk. And Control Y to confirm. Okay, let's create one more logical disk. Let's go in and create a RAID 5 array. Now RAID 5 has striping along with parity. Striping gives me a performance benefit, and the parity gives me fault tolerance. Let's assign some drives. Now if I choose Control Y right now, I have 2 drives selected. It tells me that a RAID 5 array has a minimum of 3 disks. So let's assign those 3 disks to the array. So I have a total of 240 gigabytes that I have assigned to my RAID 5 array. Control Y to create, Control Y to erase, any other key to accept. And now here's my new logical disk. And you'll notice that the capacity of the RAID 5 array is 160 gigabytes. Remember, I have 3 disks, which actually would give me a total of 240 gigabytes of space. But in this case, one of the 3 disks is used for that parity information, which leaves me 160 gigabytes that's available for storing data. So let's use that. Let's have a RAID 5 array that will be the target for my Windows installation. I'll hit escape and then escape one more time to exit, and then I'll be told that I'll reboot. So I'll do that. And now I'll reboot and go back through the BIOS. After the BIOS loads, then the RAID controller loads, and notice that it has found my disk. Again, it's trying to find the operating system on my hard disk, but the logical disk that I've just defined is empty, and there is no operating system on it. To prepare for installation, I need to change the boot order of devices so that instead of booting off of this hard drive, I will boot from the Windows installation disk. So let me restart the computer, and as the BIOS loads, I'll enter the BIOS configuration utility. Now before we go and change the boot order, notice that here my serial ATA drives have disappeared. They are no longer detected by the BIOS. That is because my disks are now controlled by the RAID controller. When the BIOS loads, it also loads the BIOS for my RAID controller, and my RAID controller controls the disk drives and how they are configured. So let's now go and change the boot order within the BIOS, and let me select boot device priority. This tells me that the first boot device that the computer is looking at is the hard drive, and we've already seen that happen. When I boot, my computer looks to the hard drive to find the operating system. Let's change that to instead look for a CD-ROM or an optical drive. Now when the computer boots, it will look to the optical drive first, and if I were to put the Windows installation disk in my computer, then it would start the installation process. And let me go down also for my second boot device, and let me choose hard drive. So if it can't find a disk in the drive, then it will move down and try to use the hard drive to boot. And I could add additional boot devices as well. I could do a floppy drive or a network boot. This is where the device tries to boot off of the network. And depending on the BIOS, I might even be able to choose a USB device as a boot device. Let's just keep my 2 boot devices, and I will exit and save my changes. And that's it. Now I'm ready for Windows installation. My next step is I would put in my Windows installation disk and reboot the computer to start the installation.